Well, still, Queen Elizabeth II's legacy as it concerns the African continent is rather ambiguous. With her death, then, comes a revival of criticisms about the British Empire, colonialism, and more recently, racism, even within the most intimate spheres of the royal family. For more on this now, we'll speak to Maya Jasanoff, professor of history at Harvard University, specialized in the history of the British Empire. Maya, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'd like to start generally. Queen Elizabeth II seems to get a lot of kind of targeted blame for the horrors of the colonial empire. What link can be made between her personally and the imperial or colonial oppression in the early days of her rule?
So I think we need to be careful to distinguish the individual from the institution. The individual was a woman named Elizabeth who lived a long and full life that ended in sometime in the afternoon UK time on Thursday. The institution, however, has gone on for hundreds and hundreds of years and continues always without a break and is now continued by her son. So, I think that with that said, what we need to understand as we look at the role of the Queen and the monarchy in the world over the course of her reign, 70 years, is that the monarchy itself remained bound up, as it had become increasingly through the 19th and 20th centuries, with the empire and its sequel, if you will, the Commonwealth, even as the individual, Queen Elizabeth II, used her personal influence, celebrity, etc., in some of the ways that your package just now indicated.
Do you think, you said she kind of remained bound up with the empire and then the Commonwealth. As a historian of the British Empire, do you think any other role for her would have been possible while still respecting kind of the confines of her duties as a queen? Would it have been possible for her to kind of more outwardly denounce some of the horrors that we saw under the British Empire?
It's an interesting question, and I think that, here we get into the niceties of how the monarchy has been constructed over the centuries. I mean, it was already a kind of fixture of monarchy that they would not interfere with politics. Well, if you've got that already as a sort of rule for the monarchy, then you're by definition saying, no, the monarch can't weigh in on the things that are happening in their name. And yet you also have a situation with the British Empire, I think to an extent unlike Britain itself, where the figurehead role of the monarchy was amplified and celebrated and extended in all sorts of ways by members of the royal family. Now, the Queen herself and members of her family undertook royal tours. There's every reason to think they were welcomed on many of those tours. But, one might ask whether those tours, for instance, needed to continue. It's in these sort of symbolic ways that one could have imagined potentially a sort of different relationship between the monarchy and the dissolved British Empire that gradually took shape during the course of her reign.
So she, Maya, presided over a pretty serious shift in mentality, the collapse of the British Empire, and then also kind of grappling with more post-colonial studies, racial awareness. How do you see her legacy on these changes?
Well, it's funny because one of her very last acts, of course, was to receive her 15th prime minister in a line dating back all the way to Winston Churchill. And the country that she was born into was overwhelmingly white. The country that she now has departed is one in which that very cabinet of the prime minister she just swore in has the three top offices of state occupied by non-white Britons, who are all of them children of immigrants from former parts of the empire. So the country has changed dramatically. Of course, the reception of Meghan Markle has, highlighted the persistence of racism within the royal family. That said, there have, of course, also been many, many ways in which the Queen herself, Charles, and others have, attempted to be figureheads for this rapidly diversifying nation. It's a tricky business. I mean, I think it's something that, many people who have sort of witnessed historical change over their lifetimes are bound to reckon with. And I think the Queen certainly in all sorts of ways attempted to be a queen for all Britons. And yet, she herself was a product of an earlier era that increasingly seemed out of step with the Britain of 2022.
Despite that, Maya, I'm curious to know what you make of those two West African nations, former French colonies, Gabon and Togo, joining the Commonwealth, especially after nations like Barbados parted with the Queen.
It's a very interesting situation. Rwanda, of course, did much the same. I think that in the, shall we say, the best possible light, the Commonwealth appears to those nations and others as being a champion of human rights, of forms of free trade, of aspects of liberal constitutionalism to which they wish to affiliate. I think in the case of Rwanda, for example, there's obviously two desire to quite explicitly step away from French influence, which in the view of present-day Rwandans is very much implicated in the history of the genocide. I think that what we see here is, frankly, the complexity of geopolitics today, the complexity of politics and the economy in a globalized world, in a world in which, we're out of the Cold War, but we're certainly sort of still having rivalries between Western Europe and the United States and manifestly now Russia, rising China. We see, I think, oppositions pretty clearly taking shape between authoritarian forces and those more committed to the preservation of democracy. And I think that certainly the kind of Commonwealth that the Queen understood herself to be at the helm of was a Commonwealth that represented all of those, if you will, anti-authoritarian tendencies. It's just very ironic that it came to represent that when it was headed by a monarch, a hereditary monarch.
So given that the history that you have so brilliantly kind of outlined there, Maya, as a final question, what direction do you think that the monarchy should or even will head in now that such a defining figure is gone?
Well, I do think that it's time to update all sorts of things. I mean, I think that I would not be at all surprised if more nations do as Barbados did and become republics and remove the British monarch as head of state. I think that there's a lot to be considered with respect to the relationship between, the finances of the monarchy and the privileges of the monarchy in a nation that's obviously, well, among other things, undergoing a huge economic crisis, but clearly transforming. I think that there is clear value, all that said, in having a head of state as distinct from a head of government. And I think one of the reasons the Queen was quite rightly beloved, particularly in recent decades, was for her seemingly genuine commitment to public service and to duty. I have every expectation that King Charles III will continue that role. My own preference would be to see a monarchy that is, divested of some of these qualities of just sheer hereditary birthright privilege, and that becomes or continues to be more and more an institution dedicated to public service and the betterment of the lives of all the people who quite distinctly don't have that sort of access to hereditary privilege.
Certainly can't disagree with that. Professor Maya Jasanoff of Harvard University, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.